Hello, and welcome to Saving People Queering Things, a Supernatural podcast. We were previously known as Driver Picks the Podcast, and the episode you're about to listen to was recorded under that name. Though our name has changed as of season 3, our show hasn't changed that much. Our structure and theme-based discussions are the same, and we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get on the road. Hello, and welcome to Driver Picks the Podcast, the show where we talk about ghosts, road trips, and free will through every episode of the TV series Supernatural. Today, we are exploring Season 2, Episode 6, No Exit, through the theme of jealousy. I'm Abigail, your host, and joining me today is a very special guest, Frances. Can you introduce yourself and tell our listeners about your experience with Supernatural and also where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, hey, I'm Frances. I go by she, her. Abigail and I found each other through KJ's podcast. So I hope now we're going to be close friends. My experience with Supernatural is that my cousin and my older sister kept on telling me to, watch the show. And I was like, yeah, I'll watch it eventually. It's on my Netflix list. And then when the pandemic started, I got my hours cut at work. I was like, what else am I going to watch? I watched everything else. So I started watching Supernatural, and within a day, I was hooked, to say the least.
Just like that.
And then I'm on Twitter as Destiel1993. Yeah, just like that. I was like, we got to keep watching this, for Dean and just for Dean, basically.
Yeah, fair. He gets you. I mean, I think that was a big hook for me as well.
I'm on Twitter as Destiel1993 and TikTok and Instagram as LetItBeLove_93.
Wonderful. Those will also be linked in the show notes for anyone. So I encourage you to go and follow Frances. She makes great content, and I'm enjoying getting to know you through our connections with KJ and Supernatural Opinions podcast. And yeah, it's fun to create this little network of all of us who are rewatching and talking and making stuff about this show.
It's so fun getting to know everybody and like you said, talking about the show. And I didn't have a lot of people talking about it during my first watch through. So like having to go through it now with everybody is so much fun.
Yeah, especially now that the show is over. I think that's why it felt like the right time to make a show about it, because we can now talk about it in the sense of the whole show being finished. There's nothing new. Well, there's still new stuff coming out about the show all the time, we know, but there's no new official actual show content.
Yes.
We are in season, 17 in terms of fan content, but that's a whole nother thing. So it's now time for our series recap, the road so far of season 2. After spending most of his adult life hunting for the demon who killed his wife, John Winchester is dead, having traded his life for Dean's, and the demon is still at large. Despite having no new leads, Sam and Dean are both avoiding their grief in different ways, but are still on the road. However, recent experiences suggest that monster hunting may not be as morally simple as John had taught them, after they have a blowout fight with another hunter and ultimately decide to let a group of non-murderous vampires go free. For now, though, most things that are not human are monsters that need to be ganked, and the Winchesters are continuing to hunt them, while getting closer to understanding what happened to John and where the demon may be now. Frances, is there anything else that you can think of that's important that's happened in season 2 so far?
I guess just more of the boys finding out that there was this whole other life that John really didn't tell them about, besides what we all found out about in season 1. But in season 2, they found out about Joe and Ellen and didn't know that John had that side of his life.
Yeah, we've started to interact with a bunch of other hunters, which also happened with Gordon, and yeah, finding out the hunter network's a lot bigger than we expected, and that we got the impression of in season 1. I appreciate that you brought that up, because that's going to continue to be a big deal, and in this episode plays into the big conflict of this episode. That brings us to this episode and to our 30-second recap. So how this works is we're each going to take 30 seconds to recap everything we can remember that was important in this episode. Can you count me in?
3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so the Sam and Dean are at the roadhouse and there is a case and Joe really wants to go on it, but Ellen is like, absolutely not. So Sam and Dean go, but it turns out Joe snuck off and is going anyway. And they're hunting the serial killer who goes after blondes, and Joe gets captured and Sam and Dean have to rescue her. And then there's this whole blow up fight with Ellen and Joe where we find out that John is partly responsible for Joe's dad's death. And then Sam and Dean leave because Joe tells them to leave. I just skimmed right past most of the plot of the actual episode and just talked about Joe and Ellen. So you can go with whatever track you want, whatever else you think is important.
Okay.
3, 2, 1, go.
All right, so we start off with a blonde girl in an apartment. She sees goo and then an eyeball on the wall. And then we cut to Ellen and Joe fighting. Joe has a case, gives it to the boys. Ellen is yelling at Joe to give the boys the case. The boys go to the apartment to check the building and they do the research, and Joe shows up. Another girl disappears. They find out there's a prison next door. They find out that it's H.H. Holmes who is the one who's haunting this building and taking the girls. Joe disappears. Joe gets locked up. That's really hard.
You did impressive. That's a really impressive first 30-second recap. And you got like so many more of the actual details of this episode than I did. So I appreciate
I talk fast. Maybe I can do it. No.
It's really hard. So it's now time for us to discuss this episode through our chosen theme. And this week our theme is jealousy. Do you have anything you'd like to start with?
Probably with Ellen and Joe fighting. I think that was probably like the big thing for the opener.
Yeah. Ellen and Joe fight, like, it's interesting because we haven't really gotten much chance to get to know Ellen and Joe. Like, we've met them 3 or 4 times this season already, but we haven't gotten to see much of their dynamic.
Yeah.
This is really the first time we get to see them really having some conflict about what their lives are. Like, we've seen Joe sort of in this sort of role of working at the roadhouse. Ellen's running the roadhouse. This is the first time we see Joe really engaged in like the hunter world, I think. And I was wondering, in terms of like jealousy, like, I don't know if you got this, but you almost get this impression that Joe is maybe a bit jealous of Sam and Dean's freedom to hunt. Like, Sam and Dean don't have a parent telling them they can't go hunt.
I definitely did notice that, like you said, they don't have a parent that's like basically on them saying like, you can't go hunting. It's too dangerous for you. And I think Joe has a hard time struggling with that, being like, well, my mom says no, but you guys can do whatever the hell you want. But my dad's not here. You guys don't have a dad. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, and Sam and Dean, like, even when John was alive, John was the opposite of Ellen. John was encouraging them to hunt. Ellen is like the opposite. Ellen is going like, this has cost our family too much.
Mm-hmm.
This is not safe. I would, oh, there's the boys are here. They can take the case. Oh, good. Like, I don't have to deal with it. They can take the case. You can stay here safe. And Joe is like very much pushing back against that. I also thought that Dean and Joe's dynamic, this is one of the biggest things I wanted to talk about in this episode, was like Dean and Joe's whole dynamic, because it's very interesting. And I'm unsure of how exactly to understand their dynamic, because they have all this like weird, like this trying to one up each other in terms of their knowledge and their skills. They're both kind of weirdly jealous of each other, kind of, but also not. I'm wondering what you think of their dynamic in this episode.
At some points their dynamic did feel very like brotherly, sisterly in some like small points, and then at other times, like you said, it did seem like Joe was a little jealous of Dean and like how he was able to just do whatever he wanted and was like the boss of his own life, the boss of whatever he was doing and hunting at the moment, and that he was able to just pick up and go. Like that's kind of like the life that Joe seems to want, since at the beginning of the episode she said she was at school and that she didn't fit in because she was the only kid with a knife collection. She wanted to find somewhere to fit in, and that was in the hunter lifestyle, and she was missing out on it. And so she really wanted Dean's lifestyle. So I feel like the jealousy really fit in right there.
Which makes sense too, like with her, how she interacts with Dean, like she's got to prove herself because she's got to prove that like she fits in the hunter world because she is in the hunter world, like in some ways more than Sam and Dean, like in a different way than they were, because she's been a part of this, like the Roadhouse, and like she's interacted with, sounds like even after her dad died, even though Ellen's been keeping her from hunting, Ellen's not kept her from like the world of the supernatural.
Yeah.
And I was even thinking about that in relation to like Sam, of like Sam wanted to get out of the hunt, wanted to have like, he's always been jealous of having like a normal life. Whereas like with Jo, she wants this hunter life because like she says later on to Dean that it makes her feel close to her dad. Which I also thought was an interesting piece when it comes to jealousy, because I think they're both a little bit jealous of the relationship the other one had with their father figure.
Yeah, definitely.
When Dean and Jo have like the biggest piece of jealousy I saw was like when Dean and Jo have this conversation about wanting to be a hunter versus not wanting to be a hunter, and Dean goes like, you have options, you could not be a hunter, like you have a mom that like wants something more for you. I think this is like one of the earlier times in the show that we see Dean being jealous of someone who has options that aren't hunting. And he even identifies, he says, you know, like I've been doing this since I was so young, I don't know anything else. I'm, you know, this is all, the hunting is all I know. But he he doesn't seem like he like, there's been other times in the show so far where he's talked about hunting being kind of his life or his destiny. But he doesn't seem upset by it. In this episode, he seems jealous of the fact that Jo has options that aren't that. And a little bit like he doesn't understand why, if she has options to not be a hunter, why she would choose to be a hunter.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that side of Dean where he kind of is looking at the options that he wasn't able to have, and like especially after that whole revelation with John before he died, and like having Dean finally like question it and be like, maybe this isn't the lifestyle that I really wanted. Maybe this is just something that was ingrained in me so hard that I think it's normal and I think that I really want it, but I don't really want it.
Yeah, and that's super interesting in this episode because Jo allows him to have that bit of a mirror to like actually identify that, because he's not had many opportunities to see, and he's not had many opportunities to even see like what it would have been like in some ways Jo's a mirror of what it could have been like for Sam and Dean if John had been like, well, I'm going to be a hunter, but I'm going to like make sure my kids still like have a stable home, still, you know, go to school, still have options, like they can choose whether or not they're a hunter, like, which is what Ellen's done. Like she is still in the hunting world, but she hasn't forced her kids to be part of it. And that's, I don't think Dean or Sam have ever like they've never seen hunters with that option. And so I like that you pointed that out because it's a big revelation, I think, for them in this episode. I wish they'd have gone into more of how Sam is interacting with Jo. I didn't realize how little interaction Sam and Jo have in this episode. I was kind of sad about that. I wanted there to be more.
Yeah, they didn't have any, did they?
No, and none, just the two of them really, other than the like very end scene when they kind of are like shooting each other like glances in the back of the car in that really awkward car ride.
Yeah. There was a funny thing that I wanted to mention was that we see that Sam has the cast on his arm, and I wanted to ask, why is Jared always hurting his arms?
I had the same thought where I was like, you know, there's not a lot of like times in 15 years that either any cast member like has to be wearing a you know, not in story, but in because they had to as the actor. But Jared does multiple times, like has like injured his arm on set multiple times. And I think this injury, I'm trying to remember what this particular injury was, because I think it's the first time.
Yeah,
I don't know.
No, the only one that I remember like why, like how it happened was the one when he was it was at the beginning of Demon Dean, and he got into that fight with Osric.
Right. Yes, so season like 10 is the next time he's actually in a cast for a outside of story reason, which is mostly just really, really funny.
It is.
Jared's just a little clumsy and has injured himself multiple
Well, I
times
mean,
on
he
set.
is called the Moose. So.
That's true. Yeah. I don't remember. I think they just explain it. I don't remember what the explanation they give in show is. It's just there, which is fair. It's honestly like it's one of the things I kind of wish the show, especially in the first 3 seasons. So after season 4, there's like some very good reasons why their injuries can magically disappear. You know, some pretty big spoilers, but like prior to that, they get over injuries sometimes remarkably quickly for how badly they get injured and how often they get injured. I would expect more like broken limbs and broken ribs, and I know they're in their early 20s and they bounce back fast, but some injuries you don't bounce back from fast.
No, you don't. I mean, they do explain that in season 15, but like,
yes.
I mean, still, you would think that like they'd still have some kind of injuries that would linger just a little bit.
Yeah, even if it's just like mildly, even if it's just, you know, like, oh, I've got to wear a sling for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I thought about in terms of jealousy, and this is again a Joe and Dean comment because that's really where I saw this theme in this episode, where when Joe asks Dean about the memories of, like, she asks, like, what is the first thing you think of when you think of your dad? And then he tells his story of like when he was 6, and it's a story related to hunting, which is very fitting that like all of his memories of John are connected to hunting. But I think Joe is jealous of the fact that Dean has like many more years of memories with his dad. Like they have both lost that parent. Dean's lost both parents, but they've both lost their fathers. But Joe has a lot less memories, and I think it's interesting how she's interpreting those memories that Dean shares with her. And that like part of the reason she wants to be doing hunting is because she does it to be close to her dad, because she doesn't have those years of memories. I think she says she was like pretty little, and I think from other sources we know that do you remember how old she was when her dad died?
I know she said that she was still in pigtails, but I don't know if there was ever an exact age that we were given.
Yeah, I think in some of the external stuff, like some of the journals, I think she's somewhere between 6 and 10. Like I think she's pretty little, which is interesting. Yeah, because the Winchesters would have been similar ages or just a little bit older. Because we kind of get the impression that Joe and Sam are similar-ish in age. Maybe?
I think they are. It sounds like they are.
Any other notes, even if they're not related to the theme? Any other like notes on this episode or things you noticed?
I really enjoyed the serial killer aspect of it. You know, like I told you before, like I'm a huge like true crime and serial killer fan, so it was really fun seeing that in the show.
Yeah, so like that's not an area that I have a lot of expertise in myself, or not something that I've done as much reading on. And so yeah, do you want to like talk about like in this episode what your impressions, like how are they presenting serial killers versus like what you know?
Yeah, so the way that they kind of just went through that list of the prison inmates, and Sam was able to pick out the name of Herman Webster Mugget. I think that's how you pronounce his last name.
Yeah, I think so.
And I was sitting there, like the first time I watched it, I remember sitting there, I'm like, that name does sound really familiar. And then when he said H.H. Holmes, I was like, they're actually doing like a real life like serial killer? And it like piqued my interest, and I was just like sitting there like glued to my screen the first time that I was watching this episode, because like I said, serial killers are just like my thing. So they did a really good job of like explaining the serial killer and who he was. And I know the episode wasn't supposed to focus mainly on him, but there was a few like tidbits of information about him that I wish that could have been put in there. Like, you know, Sam had said that he was confessing to 27 murders, but he was only convicted and sentenced for only 1 murder.
Oh, really? Only one?
Yeah, only one of them. And even though he was sitting there like confessing to all these murders, they're like, no, we're only going to get you on this one. And it wasn't even one of the ones that like was the big deal, like the blonde girls, it was his accomplice that he murdered and got caught for.
That's really interesting. That would have been an interesting thing for them to pull in. I get it wouldn't really have worked for the plot of this episode, which was all about the the stereotype of the blondes that he was going after, but that's really interesting. I think this might be the first time. I mean, obviously we've had a lot of episodes that have dealt with like really common urban legends and like mythologies and those kinds of supernatural creatures, but I think this might be the first time that is this the first time we've seen a specific serial killer or like person?
I think it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting choice, like lore wise, because they're kind of having to mix the supernatural and the real life, like the history with the super, because obviously like all of the facts they give about H.H. Holmes are historical, but then they're also pairing that with well, we've now turned him into a ghost, which obviously is fictional.
Yeah. Like the difference that had was, that they didn't mention a lot of like the history about him, and then also I believe he was in Chicago and not Philadelphia.
Okay, yeah, because they mentioned Chicago, that's where his like house was.
Yeah,
and that's where a lot of the murders take place, but then they place him in Philadelphia in terms of being in prison, which is interesting.
Yeah, like when they're caught in the state that they've been killing in, like for H.H. Holmes, he was caught in Chicago and then sent to prison in Philadelphia. Like, what if they like escaped in the prison that they were put in and then started a killing spree in this new state? Like, wouldn't you want them to be in the same state so where they would go, because they're creatures of pattern. They don't like to stray from their pattern too much, so you would want to put them somewhere where if they happen to escape, exactly where they're going to go.
That's true. And they don't, when somewhere where you've found them before, and even in terms of like legal proceedings, but I'm sure there are reasons, but it's interesting. And in this particular episode, it just kind of works out. It's also like it's such an interesting serial killer for them to have chosen like because the fact that he was buried in cement, that's a true fact about him, correct? Like that's
I think it is.
Yeah, which is super. I mean, that like is I appreciate them using that historical piece to fill the lore of this, because that is just a historical fact, but it really plays in well with their whole thing about we can't burn the bones like we would normally do because of this thing. And I like also that like appreciate that made them get really creative with how to deal with this spirit, as unrealistic as it is that they would be able to steal a cement truck and get away with that. I was like, really? Nobody noticed? Nobody took any mind about the fact that you're gonna probably have to sit there for like an hour pouring cement down a sewer pipe. It's funny though.
Yeah, it is funny. That's also another thing that like John just taught Sam and Dean how to like drive all these different vehicles, and like Dean knew the scent of chloroform. Like he taught them a lot.
Yeah, it's really interesting, their different skills kind of coming out in an episode like this. Yeah, like the chloroform, the cement truck, the fact like Sam's knowledge of serial killers, which is again going to be a thing that like Sam's like historical knowledge. Like we know Sam's good at research. That's been like, that was established in like the first episode, that Sam is good at like the book. Sam is good at like delving into the paperwork of the job. But this is one time when we see him like just working purely off of memory. Like he looks at a list of names and he goes, I recognize that, and then he makes that connection. And I was just impressed by that, like his the stuff he's got in his head, that like about history, and that's going to keep happening throughout the show, like up till the last season.
Oh yeah, and it's so funny how like Dean said, I don't remember if it was like in season 1 or something, but he said that being like book smart and knowledgeable about serial killers isn't like sexy or attractive, and I'm sitting here, I'm like, it kind of is.
I mean, honestly, Sam's Sam's like ability to just know stuff and remember stuff is a pretty attractive trait. It's pretty impressive, actually. Sam kind of keeps the ball rolling in this episode in terms of knowing what to do next. The action is focused around Dean and Joe, but they're not able to solve this case without Sam's knowledge.
Knowledge is power.
It is. Anything else, like in terms of the episode in kind of in general or related to this theme, that you had notes on?
At the end, when Ellen tells Joe whose fault it was that her dad died, and just kind of it's kind of that thought that you're just like, maybe John did have something to do with it, the way that Ellen has been acting around the boys and with the news about John and everything. And it's like, maybe he did have something to do with something bad that happened in their family, and then just confirming that it was John who was working with her dad on the last hunt, and that went awry.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, even just to contrast it with like the first couple of times we've met Ellen, like the first time we met Ellen, we, in our episode on that, actually that was my episode with KJ, joined me for that episode, and we talked about how warm and like welcoming Ellen is to the boys. Like, despite knowing who they are, she doesn't hold them responsible for what John did, and that we really, really appreciated that she welcomes him in and goes, "You've just lost your dad. Yes, your dad and I had a falling out, but that doesn't have to impact my relationship with you." And then in this episode, we see it does, because she's like, okay, well, it's well and good for me to be like, you're not your dad, but if you're going to be in a situation with my daughter where you could be like your dad, that's not okay. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't trust you. She even says like father, like son.
Yep.
She doesn't trust that that in a hunting situation she can trust the Winchesters, which fair.
Well, especially since she knows like that John had, full custody of the kids, and that he was raising them to be like exactly like him, so she was, in her mind, she was like, these are John 2.0, basically.
That's a really good point, because she doesn't have any reason to believe that they would make different decisions than John. Mm-hmm. She's never even, like, up until not very long ago, she's never even met them. She's never seen them hunt. She's not spent enough time with them to really know. And she knows that they're both, dealing with their grief. They're both probably a little bit reckless. They're young.
Yep.
And the whole, it's interesting, watching the parallels play out in this episode, the whole concept of like someone being bait, and why you would choose to have someone be bait, and what's that accomplishing. And even Dean at the beginning is going, like, making the connection. He goes to Joe and he's like, you fit this like killer's like MO. Like, he's like, you don't want to be bait. But by the end of the episode, like, he's going, we don't have another choice except like bait. And I thought that was also really interesting and really, yeah.
And I feel like that's partially like a John Winchester move. Like, I don't think that John in the beginning would have been like, let's keep you safe because you're the MO of the killer. He would have been like all for, like, in the beginning, John would have been like, let's use you as bait so we can catch this guy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we see John using his kids as bait, particularly Dean. We've seen already a few instances of Dean being in a position of playing bait when it's convenient, because I think John is very like utilitarian in his hunting strategy. He's like, whatever can accomplish the goal. And that seems like that's probably what happened with Joe's dad. And it's cool to see that, like, at the beginning, especially, Dean and Sam are subverting that. They're going, absolutely not. We're not making you bait. And Dean's like, furthermore, I'm not even letting you out of my sight because you don't know how to hunt. You're new to this. Like, he even says, like, when Joe tries to call him out and says, you're being a chauvinist, this is all chauvinist crap. And he says, this ain't gender studies. He's like, women can do the job, but amateurs can't. And he's like, I'm staying with you because you're an amateur and I don't trust that you're not going to get killed, which is very distinctly not like John.
Yeah, it's really fun to see the boys like being their own people, even though they were, 100% raised by John. They still got a little bit of themselves in them and can make better decisions than John did.
Yes, and I appreciate how that develops in this episode, because even at the end, like Joe, sorry, can't talk. Dean, like when Ellen, like Dean says to Ellen, he's like, this is not Joe's fault. He's like, he tries to take on all the responsibility, even though like realistically, that's not actually what happened, is not actually on Dean either. Joe chose to go. Joe chose to make, like, Joe is an adult able to make her own decisions. They did not push her into the risky situation. She'd made those choices. But Dean still tries to kind of take the blame for what happened, which I thought was, again, an interesting way of him distinguishing himself from John and going, like, this shouldn't have happened, and I'm going to take responsibility because I don't want Joe and Ellen to, like, their relationship to suffer. And yeah, and obviously like that doesn't work because Joe's also like, no, it wasn't your fault. And also it's not like Joe wanting to hunt is not actually about the Winchesters. Like, it's a little bit connected, but it's not really about them.
Yeah.
Though I also like loved the visual contrast of like when Joe comes, like when we get the scene where Joe asks Ellen, says, what are you not telling me? And then we get the moment where we know Ellen is telling her about what happened to her dad. And then we cut to outside and we get a shot of Dean in his dad's jacket as Joe's confronting him. And we get this like parallel, and it was just like visually like hit me that's like, he's wearing the jacket. He's in some ways like standing in for his dad. And when Joe confronts him, when Joe goes like, your dad's the reason my dad's dead. And like neither of those dads, and now both of the dads are dead. Like neither of them are there to confront each other. Yeah. It's just a very visually interesting.
It was a powerful scene.
And it kind of ends on this a bit of a like unknown note. Like Joe goes, leave. Like we don't know if we're going to see Ellen and Joe again at this point, because this is in some ways doesn't, is this something they're going to be able to get beyond?
Well, yeah, in that moment you got to think, you're like, as the boys, like, do we go back into that bar where the woman of the husband who's dead, like our dad killed him? Like, do we go back in there and face her now that we know what she knows?
Yeah, and can we ever, because they've gone to Ellen now a couple of times for help, and to Ash as well. Like they've gone to the Roadhouse for support. And even one episode ago in 205, Ellen says to Sammy and says, like, the demon, this is bigger than all of us, and you can't do this on your own. This isn't just your fight, is what she says to Sam and Dean. She says, this is about all of us, and we are better off if we work together for whatever's coming, because we know about all of these children that have these powers. We don't know why. We don't know what the demon's up to. And Ellen's like, we got to know everything so we can fight together. And then this episode, the question really is like, can they face Ellen again? Can they go to her for help now that they know what they know? And Joe, Ellen's known this for a long time about the boys, but Joe just now knows.
Oh yeah, after Joe was like, I can trust these guys, like they saved my life right now, but ooh, they killed my dad. Like how does one process that?
Yeah, how do you hold both of those things of like, they came through and they didn't do what John did. Like they didn't let her die. They did their best and they saved her. But she still has to like look at them and know that their dad is the reason her dad is dead, and that's a lot to process.
It is. That's
Oh, your audio cut again. I'll let you know when it's back. It should be back. It's funny how it does this. Oh, it's can't. Oh, I think it's back.
Okay.
Okay, I think it's back. Sorry, I think you were about to say something.
I was saying that it's a hard thing for Jo to process, especially since she's so young. She's in her early 20s, you know, that as an age that we kind of know that she is. So how do you process, like, you know, that, like, these guys that you just met, you think they're really nice people, they're there to help you, but then it's like their dad killed my dad. So it's like, how does someone process that in just like that short amount of time, going from they saved me right now to like 20 minutes later being like, oh, you know, their dad killed your dad. Like,
yeah, how does she know? And like this, she's just gone on, like, what, in a lot of ways, we don't know this for sure, but in a lot of ways, this seems to be her first real hunt. At least this seems to be one of the first times that she's been in so much, like, she's been at real risk of dying herself. Like when she is captured by, when she's taken by the spirit, and we get those scenes, like her fear and her like sense of doom is really, really strong. And I think we know that, like, this is not an experience she's had. And even like Dean identifies that too, goes, you know, like, she can put together a good case, but she's not experienced. And so now she's experienced. Now she's had this experience of hunting. She still presumably wants to be a hunter, but now there's all this complex stuff around, like, who do I like? Can I trust other hunters? Because the first hunt I went on, they saved my life, but also I found out this thing about their dad, and like that's just a lot for her as a young person.
It is. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, I love Jo. Like, Jo, I also just appreciate in this episode that we finally get a well fleshed out female character. Like, we've had some, like, we've had some really good female characters so far, as one-offs. We've had Cassie and Missouri and Layla and a few others, and Meg, but we've not had a female hunter really with a lot of screen time where we've actually gotten to know them. And we haven't gotten a lot of like peers of Sam and Dean that aren't just placed in a romantic context or as a villain. And I really appreciate that we get to know Jo in this episode as her own person.
Yeah, I really love her as a character, and I'm glad they introduced her. So it's a nice welcome change from the masculinity of the show.
Yes, I know. Just like having two female characters on screen at the same time when we have Ellen and Jo together, it's just like, it's very nice. It feels more balanced. Those scenes feel way more balanced. Yeah. Well, if you have do you have any other notes for the episode itself?
I think that was all my notes.
Awesome. Okay, so it's now time for us to pick a theme song for this week based on our discussion. And I actually need to pull up my Spotify so I can pull up a song. But do you have any thoughts for a song for a character or this episode in general, as serious or as not serious as you like? We've had a lot of interesting song choices so far this season. I'm creating a playlist with all of the songs linearly for season 2. We've got a bit of everything. It's a very fun playlist so far. Last episode, we had a Taylor Swift song, a Bob Dylan song, and an Imagine Dragons song as our 3 theme songs. So,
oh jeez, that's a good variety.
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
I'm actually gonna go in with a Taylor Swift song.
Yes.
Since you mentioned her, I've been getting into Taylor Swift more. I'm a Swiftie again, but so this one, her new album is perfection.
Oh, it's so good.
But so I'm gonna go with Ellen and Jo and the mother-daughter relationship, and showing that Ellen doesn't want Jo to grow up more than she already is. You know, she wants her to stay kind of in that normal world rather than going into the hunter world more. So I chose Never Grow Up by Taylor Swift.
When you started describing that, I was like, oh, are you going with Never Grow Up? Because I hope you are.
Yes.
Oh, that's so good. That's such a good song for this episode. Oh man, that makes me have feelings. Nice.
Yeah, I felt like it fit really well.
It does. I hadn't even thought of like that perspective of looking at the Ellen and Jo relationship. Yeah, I'm trying to find the song that I was singing. Oh. I had a harder time with this particular episode and finding a song. Oh, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, I was trying to go like the serial.
Oh, you cut again. Oh no, you cut out again. Hopefully it'll come back. Oh, are you back? Is it back? Is it back? Is it back? Okay, I think it's back. Sorry, you said you were going to give your explanation and then it cut.
Yeah, I was saying that I was looking for more like serial killer songs, like something that like mentioned like either like a serial killer name or like, you know, anything to do with like true crime or anything. And then I was like, no, it didn't really fit in my mind. So then I came up with the mother and daughter side of it.
I like that. I'm gonna go with a song called "Roll with the Punches" by Colony House, and particularly for Jo, because we just see Jo going into hunting like full force. Like she's done the research, she's done her homework, she doesn't have a lot of experience, but she just throws herself in there. And I think this song kind of has that sort of feeling of almost thinking you're invincible, but you're not. Like, and she just and Jo like rolls with everything that happens to her in this episode. And even when she's captured, she is fighting back. Even after she's been rescued, she's still willing to play bait so that they can take down this spirit. Like, she shows a ton of just resilience and in the face of a lot of terror in this episode. And I think this song kind of expresses that.
Yeah, that fits really well.
Yeah. So those were our theme songs for the week. I'm going to write them down in here so that I can add them to our playlist. It's just called Never Grow Up, right?
Yeah, Never Grow Up.
Yeah. So next we're going to move into our Going Meta segment where we're tracking lore, the Bechdel test, pop culture, all that fun stuff. First off, in terms of deaths, we don't actually see, do we see any on-screen confirmed deaths?
No, we just see when the ghost grabs Jo and Teresa and the other girl.
Yeah, and
but we don't see like him killing them.
No, and when we are down there, the only body we see is like a skeleton. We don't actually see a body. So presumably like there are no actual like deaths that take place in the episode. We obviously know that there are many deaths connected to H.H. Holmes and to his spirit. But yeah, no on-screen deaths and no significant character deaths, except that in some ways we could count the fact that we find out about Joe's father and the significance of that in his relationship with John and in terms of how that's going to impact everyone else in these two families. We can see that as significant. Obviously, it doesn't happen within this episode. It happens many years before the show starts, but
it still counts. It's very significant.
Yeah, significant because of its impact. So next we have the Bechdel test. Do we pass today?
Well, we have Ellen and Jo. So we have two named female characters. We have more, but the other girls don't interact. Well, Jo interacts with Teresa.
Yes, though they're mostly interacting about the spirit. So I don't know if that one
which
would
is
count.
A male.
Yeah. But Ellen and Jo talk about stuff.
Yeah, they talk about more than they do talk about the Winchesters and their dad, but they don't really, I mean, they talk about Jo and her life and being a hunter and stuff. So yeah, I guess we do pass the Bechdel.
Yeah. And we pretty clearly pass. I think like we have a lot of episodes where it's kind of dicey whether or not they pass. This one I think is pretty solidly. I mean, it's still incredibly low bar, but they get meaningful interactions that are about their own lives that aren't, because yes, hunting is very connected to like her father and all these things. So there is that element, but it also like when they're interacting about it, they're interacting about Jo's life and the choices she's making and And so I think it passes a couple of times based on a couple of conversations between Joe and Ellen.
Yeah, I think so too.
Which is something. Is something. It's
We're
better.
getting there.
Yeah. Next we have lore. So we don't really have any lore that's like big picture. Unless you noticed it. Did you notice anything that's kind of connected to the overarching plot in this episode?
Not they didn't really delve into it too much. They, briefly said that he was a ghost, and they talked more about the serial killer side of him, and they didn't really do much of lore in this episode.
No, and all the stuff that they're doing with the ghost is all pretty standard, like what we've gotten used to seeing from ghosts. Salt rings, salting and burning the bodies. They obviously don't salt and burn this time, but they talk about it. This doesn't really add any lore. It adds some family history, but that's kind of about it. Yeah. It's actually a pretty short lore check today. In terms of locations, there are no really filming locations of note because most of this episode takes place inside of the hotel, or sorry, not the apartment building, and which is just, I think, probably might have just been a soundstage, and some various buildings, and the Roadhouse, which is the same location that they filmed the Roadhouse at. The last few episodes, so nothing of note there, nothing interesting that I recognized. And in terms of story, do you want to, where does the story take place in terms of location?
It takes place first in the Roadhouse, and then we do in Philadelphia at the hotel.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
locations this episode.
It was an easy episode.
Yeah. And in terms of pop culture, so I mean, this episode is chock full of ghosts. There's a few Ghostbusters references. We have more ectoplasm in this episode than we've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
So much, which Sam chalks down to like being like, you have to be a majorly powerful spirit to have that much ectoplasm. But also Dean gets very excited about it because Ghostbusters, and we know Dean has a huge soft spot for the Ghostbusters.
It's so funny how nerdy he is sometimes. It's so cute.
Yeah. We've talked about that a lot in our show so far. A lot of episodes we've come back to being like, wow, Dean's nerdy side came out this episode, and this is another one. Do you want to talk about any other pop culture things you can pull from my list, or anything else you noticed?
I honestly didn't really notice anything more than just like the Ghostbusters ones. Let's see. You did make the connection there with the Star Wars reference when Joe was saying that she was there to save her. When she was there with Teresa, and she was saying, "I'm here to rescue you."
Yeah, which is a Star Wars quote that Luke said to Leia, which is just fun. Like, again, you kind of get the impression. It also comes back to like this whole thing of like Joe and Dean kind of are like, they're played as quite similar in this episode, as like they're both like contrasted with each other, and they're also shown to be quite similar in their personalities, which I thought was really interesting. And that's another thing where like Joe is also making pop culture references really subtly. Yeah, that's kind of all the like significant pop culture stuff. I mean, obviously we talked a bunch about the serial killers element as well, and that's huge in pop culture. Like H.H. Holmes would be something that not everyone would know, but if you know anything really about serial killers, you're likely going to have heard of him.
Yeah, he's a pretty big one, being like one of the first serial killers in history. So
yeah. And next, or last in our going meta segment, we have our gaydar, which is our sexuality and gender connections in this episode. My main note here is the really interesting way that Dean and Joe interact, because Dean kind of big brothers her a bit, but he also sort of flirts with her. And I'm chalking that down to like, he doesn't really know how to relate to women. He hasn't had a lot of women in his life that haven't been either like a parental figure or like someone he's dating or sleeping with. And it kind of comes out with Joe where you're like, I don't think you're actually flirting with her, but you don't really know how to interact outside of flirting. So you do. And which I remembered, like, even when he meets Jess in the pilot, he does the same thing where I'm like, I don't think you're actually flirting with her because, like, she's your brother's girlfriend. I don't think you're actually flirting. And with Joe, I don't think he's actually flirting because, like, I don't think he's actually seriously trying to get anywhere with her, but he just, that's his default for interacting with women.
I agree.
Yeah, I was wondering if you noticed anything else in terms of this episode, because this episode is finally an episode where we get a lot of a female character.
Yeah, just basically what you said with Dean and Joe, because they're basically the only, like, besides Ellen, the women interaction that we get with Dean. And you know, he does kind of fill in that role, like protective older brother, like, you know, I'm not going to let you go and put yourself into danger, we're going to keep you safe, you know, you're an amateur hunter, so I'm going to make sure I'm by your side throughout this whole thing. But then also he throws in like his little quips and flirts, and I'm like, you can't really do both. But like you said, you know, he doesn't know. You know, you can't flirt with your sister.
Yeah, but... exactly. And he's like, which role is she playing in your life? Like, what's going on? It's a little strange, and also but it makes sense. Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting with Ellen too. Like, I, you know, appreciate, again, we've got this like the third time that he's been mentioned that he's a little afraid of Ellen, which every time Dean's like, I'm a little afraid of your mom, it's really funny. And I'm like, yes, you should be. As Ellen demonstrated in this episode, you absolutely should be afraid of her. Don't mess with Ellen or Joe, because they will win.
Oh yes, every time. Also, I personally think, even though there hasn't really been any like the gay side of Dean Winchester yet, but I think that as the show goes on and we see more of him like interacting in a flirty way with males, that we can kind of tell that he just doesn't really know how to interact too much with women in general. Like when it comes to like seeing a woman and being like, do I flirt with her? Do I act like she's a sister? Do I act like she's a friend? Like how do I interact with this woman? And then he kind of just puts it all in this big jumble mix together.
That's a really good point. And we've talked in a few episodes about that, about how, you know, he's grown up in a largely male sort of world with very minimal female interactions. And then because we're also reading and looking at his character and looking at more fluid sexuality, we're looking at and being like noticing moments where we're like, oh, you're maybe interested in both, you're maybe interested in different people, like you're not interested necessarily in just one gender. And because we're seeing that, like it kind of adds to this in an episode like this, where you're going, it's really complex for him to sort out, how am I interacting with anyone, and then with females particularly so, especially in these early seasons before he has any real like friends that are girls, which in some ways Joe is going to be the first one that's like a person that he's not actively trying to like hook up with, but is also not treating like a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really, really interesting.
It's funny how the show started off being as Sam was supposed to be the main character, but like Dean is just as much of the main character. Like there's so much that Dean goes through, and like we talk about Dean like a lot more than Sam, I feel like, when we're doing like random discussions on like Tumblr and stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting because again, in the second season, like in the first season, it's really focused on finding their dad, and like Sam is our kind of our like focus character. In this season, the big mystery revolves around Sam, around like what's up with these powers, but we're still getting a lot of episodes like this one where Sam's role is fairly minimal.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's definitely crucial. He's crucial to the plot of this episode, but in terms of like the character stuff that's going on, his role's pretty minimal. And I think they're almost balancing out the two characters by like giving, like Sam is really crucial to like the big plot. But a lot of the like emotional character stuff is happening with Dean in the wake of like his father's death and everything he's sorting out. And it's very, very interesting. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that you pointed that out. So finally today we have our Q&A segment. So in this segment, we are attempting to propose an answer to something that the episode doesn't answer, particularly relating to the writing, the filming, or the acting choices. If you are listening and you would like to submit a question for a future episode, send us a voicemail using the link in the episode description, or you can tag us on TikTok or Twitter, or send us a message on Tumblr. We would love to answer a question that you have about a future season 2 episode. So today, my question is, we find out in this episode that Jo was at school. What do we think Jo was studying before she presumably dropped out? Is the kind of the impression we get, that she left because she was like, I was a freak with a knife collection. What do you think she was studying?
Let's see. The way, I don't know, Jo could have been studying anything. Like, maybe she was doing more like history stuff because she wants to be like a hunter, so maybe she was like trying to delve into like American history, European history, like something where she could see more of like the goings on in history, and like maybe some like lore classes, and then like some colleges have like like mythology courses.
Yeah. Oh no, you cut out. Oh no. Wait for it to come back, because you're saying a really good point. It's back. It'll come back. It always does. Oh, it's back. There we go. There we go. I think it's back. You were saying about like mythology classes and stuff. That's kind of where you cut.
Yeah, that she was probably, along with like history classes, she was probably taking like mythology and like lore classes to try to like put connections together and like make hunting a little bit easier for herself.
I love that. I love that answer because it makes it like, I love the idea. Like, so Sam went to college to get away from hunting. So he like did not study things related to hunting. But I love the idea that like Jo maybe would have gone to college and been like, I'm going to use this to become a better hunter. I'm going to use this to become a hunter. Like, I'm going to use this to like gain knowledge, because that seems like actually quite in tune with her character. And that even like when she talks about it, she leaves school because it doesn't work for her. But she seems like the kind that would have been like, okay, I'll go to school because my mom wants me to go to school. I'll go to school because it's the thing to do, but I still know what I really want. What I really want is to be a hunter.
Yep.
Nice. I love that. Jo as a history mythology major is also would explain some of the like how good she is with tracking and paperwork, like the fact that she puts together this whole case so well. And like, I mean, it's kind of implied that she has Ash's help, but Jo is very intelligent. It's very clear.
Mm-hmm.
So finally today we have our fic rec of the week, our fan fiction recommendation. I have one that is not at all connected to this because it's surprisingly hard to find good fics that are about the Roadhouse. The Roadhouse features in a lot of fan fiction, but I've had a hard time finding ones that were specific to Jo and Ellen and like focused on them. So I'm going to recommend something that's totally unrelated, but that I really enjoyed, and it was it's called r/supernatural, and it's basically this. The premise is that Dean has been using Reddit for like a decade to try and deal with his personal problems instead of going to therapy. And so instead he posts on Reddit and tries to get people's opinions on his life and on things he's dealing with. And you get these and it's basically just made up of like fake Reddit threads for Dean at various points throughout the seasons. And it's really incredibly funny. It will be linked in the show notes. I laughed really hard. It doesn't contain spoilers for basically seasons 4 through like 14, but very worth it for a good laugh. If you're interested, I know you may or may not, I don't know if you read fan fiction, but if you have a recommendation for any fan fiction, you are welcome to share it. If you don't, that's also fine.
Yeah, a lot of the fanfic that I've been reading is Destiel related. So I've been reading like the big ones, like down to Agincourt and Twist and Shout. So
oh, good classics.
Right. Yeah, so I don't have really much to recommend because the ones that I read are all recommended to me, so they're already like big ones.
They're big ones. Yeah, I'm trying to find ones that are like Yeah, interesting and like relevant enough for large portions of fandom, but aren't those massive ones because everyone knows those ones anyway. So,
Yeah.
and they're all Destiel too, which just makes it hard to recommend them at this point in our show. In season 4, it'll be a lot easier to start recommending Destiel related fanfic.
Yeah, when we get there, I'll have a lot of fanfics for you.
There we go. I will come remember that and come back to you for that. Is there anything else you'd like to say on this episode?
I don't know. It was honestly, it was like one of the better episodes to me of season 2. It was one of my favorites. Like I said before, you know, I love serial killers, so that's why it's one of my favorites, but also because we get that interaction with Joe and Ellen and see like a different side of the Hunter's world than we've been seeing all of season 1 and the beginning of season 2. So it's really fun to finally see, you know, the different hunters and get to know them and then get to see more of Joe in this episode.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. This is a super fun episode, and I think it's really well done, both in its storytelling and in its character development, which a lot of times Supernatural does really well with one and not so well with the other. And this one like has a really compelling, self-contained story that is genuinely kind of terrifying. Like some of the way they do some of the shots, like it's quite scary, but it's also like we really get to know Joe. We get to know more about Dean. We get to know Ellen. It's a really well-rounded episode. I agree. It's one of the stronger of season 2. And so I'm glad you got to come and chat with me about it.
Yeah, this was so much fun.
Yeah. So that is the end of our show. Thank you for joining me, Frances.
Thanks for having me.
You can subscribe to Driver Picks the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can come talk to us on social media or submit a question for a future episode through the link in the show notes. You can follow Frances. Do you want to give your social media handles again here?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter as Destiel1993 and TikTok and Instagram as LetItBeLove_93.
Lovely. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, I just want to say to everyone who listens, I'm a new fan, so thank y'all for welcoming me into the fandom, making me feel loved. So this has been a fun 1.5 years with the Winchester brothers, and I'm super excited to keep, you know, making.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! I lost you. I got like half of that. It's gonna come back. Oh, there it is. There you're back. There you're back. There you're back. I think you were just saying. I think you were just saying you are going to continue making, and then it kind of cut.
I was saying that I'm excited to continue making these podcast episodes with you and KJ, and maybe make one of my own. This has been such a fun ride.
Yes, it has. I'm so glad that you were able to be here, and thanks for jumping in and being a part of this fandom and being part of this discussion. It's like been super fun for me to get to know more fans through doing this podcast, and yeah, I really enjoy hearing different people's perspectives. Thanks for bringing your knowledge of serial killer lore and just your perspective on this episode. So thank you to all of our listeners for coming along for the ride. We wish you a peaceful road until we meet again. Next week, we're going to be discussing season 2, episode 7, The Usual Suspects, through the theme of adversity. That's our show. Thanks for listening.